Colonial Life, Farms, Crafts, and Family, Part 1. Imagine the early morning mist rolling across a patchwork of fields, a rooster crowing somewhere in the distance, and the soft creak of wooden doors opening as the first rays of sunlight break through the trees. Welcome to colonial America, a world where life was hard, simple, and deeply connected to the land. In the 1600s and 1700s, the vast majority of people living in the English colonies were farmers. Cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston were growing, yes, but most colonists lived miles away from any town center. Their lives revolved around one thing, the farm. And that farm wasn't a sprawling plantation for most, it was a family's lifeline, a few dozen acres of earth that had to feed them, clothe them, and keep them alive. Let's step inside that world. A colonial farm was a universe in itself. There were no supermarkets, no tractors, no plumbing, and every single day demanded work. At dawn, men and boys might already be in the fields, cutting hay or guiding the plow behind an ox or horse. Women would be tending the hearth, a roaring fire that served as stove, heater, and sometimes the only source of light. Farms in New England were often small and rugged. The land there was rocky and hilly, not ideal for large-scale agriculture. Families grew what they could: corn, beans, squash, the three sisters first taught to them by Native Americans. They might also plant rye, barley, or oats, and keep a few animals: cows for milk, chickens for eggs, pigs for meat. Every bit of land mattered. Even the smallest patch near the kitchen might be planted with herbs or root vegetables. Down south, life was a different picture. The soil was richer, the climate warmer, and plantations began to take root. Tobacco in Virginia, rice and indigo in the Carolinas, these were cash crops, grown not just for survival, but for export. But don't think all Southerners were wealthy planters living in grand mansions. The vast majority were small farmers, too, struggling families who grew food for themselves, maybe selling a bit extra at market if they were lucky. For every prosperous plantation owner, there were dozens of ordinary colonists working from sunrise to sunset just to keep their families fed. If the land was the backbone of colonial life, then the family was its heart. Colonial families were large, often with 6, 8, even 10 children. Life expectancy was lower, so having many children was a matter of survival. Every pair of hands counted. By the age of 5 or 6, a child would already be helping, gathering eggs, milking cows, fetching water, chopping wood, or tending younger siblings. The father was considered the head of the household, responsible for providing and protecting. The mother, however, was the soul of the home. Her day was endless. She cooked every meal from scratch, baked bread in a stone oven, spun wool into yarn, sewed clothing, made soap and candles, and tended the garden. She might even help in the fields when needed. A colonial woman's work never truly stopped. Letters and diaries from the time reveal a world where a mother might rise before dawn and still be sewing or churning butter by candlelight at night. Yet, there was pride in it. For many, the home was not just a place, it was proof of endurance, a fortress of love in a harsh and uncertain world. Children were raised with strict discipline but also deep affection. The Bible guided moral lessons, and respect for elders was absolute. Sundays were sacred, the entire family would attend church, often walking miles to get there. Faith and family went hand in hand, forming the moral core of colonial life. Imagine living in a world where almost everything you own, you built or made yourself. That was the colonial reality. From the furniture in your home to the clothes on your back, nearly every item came from local hands, often your own. The farm was a living workshop. Men might double as carpenters, blacksmiths, or cobblers. Women were tailors, weavers, and herbal healers. Nothing went to waste. A broken tool was mended, a torn shirt patched, a barrel reused. In New England towns, you'd find specialized craftsmen: the blacksmith, shaping iron into nails, hinges, and horseshoes; the cooper, crafting barrels for storing grain and ale; the miller, grinding corn and wheat into flour. These tradesmen were essential to community life. Their skills kept the colonies running. And let's not forget the apprenticeships, one of the pillars of early American society. Young boys, sometimes as early as 10 years old, would be sent to live with a master craftsman for 7 years or more. There they'd learn a trade, printing, shoemaking, carpentry, and when their time was up, they'd start their own shop, often in a new town. That system built the first generation of American artisans. In every sense, colonial life was about self-reliance. There were no government safety nets, no supermarkets, no factories. If a storm ruined your crop or a disease struck your livestock, your family's survival was on the line. That harsh reality forged something deep in the colonial character, a mix of determination, practicality, and quiet faith. Now, let's step inside a colonial home. Forget about comfort as we know it. The average farmhouse had 1 or 2 rooms, maybe a loft where children slept. The walls were rough-hewn timber or logs, the floors packed earth or simple planks. A huge fireplace dominated the main room. It was where food was cooked, where warmth came from, where families gathered after sunset. Furnishings were sparse but meaningful. A sturdy table, handmade chairs, perhaps a cradle or a chest for linens. Candles provided light, but they were expensive, so nights were dim. Still, within that simple home, there was something profound, a sense of belonging. After a long day of toil, families would gather around the fire, share stories, read the Bible, or sing hymns. For all the hardships outside, the hearth was a refuge, the glowing center of colonial life. It's easy to romanticize the past, the image of the quiet farm, the simple life. But make no mistake, colonial life was brutal. Illnesses like smallpox, malaria, and dysentery were constant threats. A broken bone or infection could be fatal. Winters were merciless. Food could run short. Fires, floods, and storms could destroy years of labor in a single night. And yet, through all of it, people endured. They built communities out of wilderness, raised children in faith, and looked to the future with hope. To them, the colonies were not just a place to live, they were a chance to build something lasting. A new world. What's remarkable is how much the rhythm of farm life shaped American values. When you live by your own hands, when every harvest depends on your effort and God's mercy, you begin to prize independence. You learn self-respect. You don't take kindly to being told what to do by a faraway king or parliament. That's where the seeds of the American spirit were first planted, not in the cities, not in the assemblies, but on those small, dusty farms. The belief that hard work, faith, and family were enough, that no man was born to rule another. That idea grew as surely as corn in the fields, watered by sweat and struggle. The colonial farmer may not have known it, but his daily labor was shaping the foundation of a nation. As the day ends, the sky turns gold over the rolling fields. A mother calls her children in from the yard. A father stacks the last of the firewood by the door. Inside, the smell of cornbread and stew fills the air. Candles flicker. The family bows their heads in prayer. It's a picture of peace, hard-earned peace. Because tomorrow, the work begins again. But in that quiet moment, something timeless lingers. The same feeling that would carry America through centuries of change, gratitude, grit, and faith in the promise of a better tomorrow. That's the story of colonial life, and this is only the beginning. Colonial life, farms, crafts, and family, Part 2. Picture a dirt road winding through tall pines, leading to a small colonial town. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer rings through the air, echoing across the square. Horses clatter down the main street pulling wooden carts loaded with barrels, flour, and tools. A faint smell of bread drifts from the bakehouse. Chickens scatter as children chase each other past the well. This is the heartbeat of early America beyond the farm, the craft, the trade, the community. While most colonists lived on farms, Towns were the lifelines that connected rural families to the rest of the world. The farmer might grow the wheat, but it was the miller who ground it, the cooper who made the barrel to hold it, and the merchant who sold it down by the harbor. Every trade depended on another. Together, they formed a living web of skill and survival. In these small towns, tradesmen were the artisans of a young civilization. The blacksmith was king, his forge roared like the heart of the settlement. He shaped iron into plows and nails, horseshoes and hinges, tools and weapons. Without him, no farm or home could function. His arms were strong from years of hammering, his face darkened by smoke, his shop glowing red through the night. Next door might be the carpenter, cutting and shaping the very bones of colonial life. Every home, barn, and wagon came from his hands. He worked with saw, adze, and plane, turning raw timber into order and design. To build something that lasted, that was his pride. And then there was the cooper, a master of curved wood and iron hoops, crafting barrels that stored nearly everything: flour, salt, meat, cider, even gunpowder. Barrels were the plastic containers of their day, indispensable, traded, reused, and repaired 100 times over. Each craft had its rhythm, its wisdom, and its secrets passed from one generation to the next. Not all crafts were dominated by men. In countless homes, women practiced arts that sustained their families and their communities. The spinning wheel and the loom were symbols of female skill and patience. Women carded raw wool, spun it into thread, dyed it with plants, and wove it into cloth. Flax became linen. Wool became warmth. Clothing wasn't bought, it was built, one thread at a time. In some towns, women gathered for spinning bees, communal events where neighbors worked together, talking, laughing, and sharing gossip while their hands moved tirelessly. These gatherings weren't just social, they were acts of independence. Centuries later, spinning bees would become patriotic events, a symbol of resistance to British imports. But in the early colonial days, they were simply about survival. Behind every craftsman was a boy, an apprentice, learning his place in the world. At the age of 10, 12, or 13, a family might send their son to live with a tradesman in town. He'd eat and sleep in his master's home, wake before dawn, sweep the shop, stoke the fires, fetch water, and slowly, patiently, learn the trade. The master wasn't just a teacher, he was a guardian, a moral guide, sometimes strict to the point of cruelty, but always shaping the boy into a man of skill and discipline. Apprenticeships usually lasted 7 years. When the boy came of age, he became a journeyman, traveling from town to town, working for wages, perfecting his craft. Only after years of hard labor would he be allowed to open his own shop, to hang a sign bearing his name, to take his own apprentice, and to begin the cycle again. This system was the backbone of the colonial economy. It created skilled labor, built trust, and passed down knowledge in an age before textbooks and factories. The pride of being a craftsman, of mastering something with your hands, was one of the earliest seeds of American identity. As towns grew, so did the world of trade. Once a week, the square would come alive with market day. Farmers brought butter, eggs, cheese, and vegetables. Craftsmen sold handmade tools, cloth, candles, and shoes. The merchant's table gleamed with imported goods, sugar from the Caribbean, tea from China, molasses and rum from the West Indies. Trade connected the colonies to the farthest reaches of the globe. A ship leaving Boston might carry barrels of salted fish to Portugal, return with wine and olive oil, then trade those goods again in the Caribbean. Charleston merchants exported rice and indigo, importing fine furniture, silverware, and fabrics for the wealthy elite. But beneath all this commerce, something else was stirring, a sense of pride and self-sufficiency. The colonies were still loyal to Britain, but more and more, they were standing on their own feet. They didn't just consume, they created. American craftsmanship was beginning to speak with its own voice. Walk into a colonial workshop, and you'd see tools that were both primitive and elegant, chisels and hand saws, wooden planes, iron hammers, draw knives, files, and awls. Each tool was made to last, often passed from father to son. Every mark on its handle told a story. Without machines, everything depended on human skill. The printer's press creaked as it rolled ink onto pages, spreading news and ideas. The wheelwright shaped wooden spokes for wagons that carried settlers westward. The silversmith carved delicate designs into spoons, candlesticks, and cups for the colonial gentry. The shoemaker cut and stitched leather, one pair at a time. Each trade required patience, knowledge, and pride. In a way, every craft was its own form of art. While men dominated most official trades, women were quietly vital to the colonial economy. Many widows took over their husbands' businesses, running taverns, inns, or small shops. Others became midwives, seamstresses, or healers, using herbal remedies passed down through generations. In port cities like Philadelphia and Newport, women even participated in trade, managing imports or selling goods in open-air markets. Though laws often denied them equal rights, colonial women carved out spaces of power and respect through sheer necessity and ability. The family economy was collective. Husbands, wives, and children all worked together, blending home and business into one. A blacksmith's wife might keep the books or sell nails and tools at the counter. A printer's daughter might set type or run errands to the post office. Labor and life were intertwined. No colonial town would be complete without its tavern. It wasn't just a place for ale and food, it was the center of community life. Travelers stayed the night, merchants struck deals, and locals gathered to share news. Some taverns doubled as post offices, meeting halls, or even courthouses. They were noisy, smoky, and alive with conversation. You might hear debates about crops and weather, but also whispers of rebellion and freedom. It was in taverns that the earliest sparks of American independence began to glow, where printers, tradesmen, and farmers discussed taxes, liberty, and the growing tension with Britain. What started as a mug of ale shared among neighbors would one day turn into revolution. Across all the colonies, whether in New England or the South, religion shaped daily work. The Puritan ethic in particular taught that labor was a form of worship, that hard work, thrift, and discipline were marks of godliness. Laziness was not just frowned upon, it was sinful. This belief ran deep in colonial society. The Sabbath was strictly observed. Shops closed, tools were put away, and families gathered for prayer. Ministers preached about diligence and virtue. It was a world where one's reputation rested on character, on honesty, craftsmanship, and devotion. And though the colonies were diverse, Quakers in Pennsylvania, Anglicans in Virginia, Puritans in Massachusetts, they shared a common belief, that work itself was sacred. Books were rare, but education mattered. Boys might learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, enough to keep accounts and read the Bible. Girls were often taught sewing, cooking, and household management. But both learned one essential truth: skill was survival. Even those who couldn't read could build, plant, repair, and trade. The measure of a person's worth was not in wealth or title, but in usefulness. Idleness is the devil's workshop, they'd say, and they meant it. What made colonial America remarkable wasn't its wealth or technology, it was its people. Every craftsman, farmer, and merchant believed in doing things right. Tools were built to last. Deals were sealed with a handshake. Reputation was everything. If your work was shoddy or dishonest, the whole town would know. That moral fabric, the belief that a person's word was their bond, became one of the most enduring legacies of colonial life. It shaped the young nation's sense of honor, justice, and independence. As the 18th century progressed, the colonies grew more connected and prosperous. Roads improved. Postal routes expanded. Goods and ideas traveled faster than ever. But along with prosperity came ambition, and restlessness. Colonists began to see themselves not as mere subjects of the British Crown, but as something else, something new. Americans. The craftsman who once relied on British imports began to make his own tools. The merchant who traded across the Atlantic started dreaming of trading across the continent. The farmer who worked his land with sweat and faith began to believe that the land itself was his by right. The seeds of revolution were sown not just in politics, but in every shop, farm, and family home. In the dim glow of a blacksmith's forge, sparks danced through the night. A hammer strikes steel, again and again, shaping something strong, something enduring. That hammering sound is more than just metal meeting metal. It's the echo of a people shaping their own destiny. Each craftsman, each farmer, each family, working not just to survive, but to build a world where freedom and labor walk hand in hand. From the hum of the loom to the creak of the wagon wheel, from the crackle of the hearth to the roar of the forge, this was the sound of America being born. Colonial Life, Farms, Crafts, and Family, Part 3. The Colonial Family and the American Spirit. The year is 1750. The colonies stretch from the rocky coast of Maine to the marshes of Georgia. 13 little worlds, each with its own rhythm, and yet, all beating to a single, human pulse, the family. If you stood at dusk outside a colonial farmhouse, you might hear the faint sounds of laughter through the window. Inside, a mother mends clothes by firelight. A father reads from a worn Bible. Children huddle around, half listening, half dreaming. The smell of stew fills the room. The day's labor is done, and for a few precious hours, there is peace. This was the heart of colonial life, not the wars, not the politics, but the humble, enduring rhythm of home. In the colonies, marriage was both practical and sacred. People married young, often in their early 20s, sometimes even earlier, not for luxury, but for survival. A man needed a partner to run a household. A woman needed a husband to secure her future. Love often came later, after the work, the births, the storms survived together. Yet affection was real. Letters between husbands and wives show tenderness, humor, even poetry. My dear and faithful friend, one New England husband wrote to his wife while away on business, your face is ever before me, and I long for the comfort of your voice. Weddings were simple affairs, a family gathering, a meal, and perhaps a dance. No wedding gowns or grand ceremonies, just promises made before God and community. Divorce was rare and scandalous, but marriages were strong because they had to be. Each depended entirely on the other. Marriage in colonial America wasn't a fairy tale, it was a partnership of endurance. Children were everywhere in colonial homes. In a world where disease and accident could claim lives suddenly, large families were the norm. 10 or 12 children were not uncommon, though heartbreak often accompanied birth. Infant mortality was high. Parents buried children far too often, tiny graves beside the churchyard, silent reminders of life's fragility. But when children lived, they were the family's greatest blessing, and its workforce. Childhood as we know it didn't exist. By the age of 5, a child had chores. By 10, real responsibilities. Boys helped their fathers in the fields, tending animals or chopping wood. Girls helped their mothers spin yarn, cook, and care for younger siblings. Education, if available, was shaped by faith. Children learned to read so they could study the Bible. In New England, small one-room schools appeared, where a single teacher might instruct 20 or 30 students of all ages. In the South, wealthy planters hired private tutors, while poorer families taught at home. The Bible and the Hornbook, a small wooden paddle printed with the alphabet and prayers, were the first textbooks of the American colonies. But education wasn't just about reading. It was about character, learning obedience, humility, and self-reliance. A child was taught early that the world owed them nothing, that survival came through work, faith, and family. Religion wasn't just for Sundays, it shaped every moment of life. Before breakfast, families prayed. Before sleep, they prayed again. The Bible sat on the table beside the candle. It was history, law, and moral compass all in one. In New England, Puritans believed the home was a little church. The father was its minister, responsible for his children's souls as much as their bodies. In the South, Anglican families gathered in grander churches, but their devotion was just as deep. Quakers in Pennsylvania practiced simplicity and equality, teaching that every soul, male or female, rich or poor, held the inner light of God. Religion bound communities together. It gave meaning to struggle. It offered comfort through loss and gratitude through plenty. For colonists who faced death, isolation, and hardship, faith was the invisible thread that kept the fabric of life from tearing apart. In many ways, colonial women bore the heaviest burdens. Their work began before sunrise and ended long after dark. They cooked over open fires, cared for children, made soap and candles, wove cloth, and tended gardens. They were nurses, teachers, and midwives. In the husband's absence, a wife ran the entire household, and often the farm. A woman's sphere was the home, but within that sphere, she wielded enormous power. She managed the family's food supply, the clothing, the livestock, even the money if her husband was away. Her knowledge of herbs and medicine could save lives when doctors were rare. She might never vote or hold office, but in truth, the colonial home stood because of her hands. Some women became symbols of independence long before the Revolution. And Bradstreet, the Puritan poet, wrote verses celebrating both God and the trials of domestic life. Others defied norms, widows running taverns, shopkeepers selling fabric and goods, or healers tending to entire villages. Though the law saw them as dependents, history remembers many as quiet architects of endurance. Colonial life was hard, but not joyless. When harvest was gathered or a new barn finished, people celebrated. There were dances, music, and games, fiddles, drums, and the laughter of neighbors carried across the fields. Children played with carved wooden dolls, hoops, and marbles. Adults played cards or held shooting contests. In New England, holidays were often tied to religion, days of Thanksgiving or fasting. In the South, social gatherings revolved around plantations, feasts, weddings, and church picnics that could last for days. Taverns, too, were gathering places not just for men, but for communities. A traveler might pay for a bed of straw in the corner, share a jug of cider, and trade stories by the fire. Gossip, politics, and laughter flowed as freely as the ale. Even in the hardest winters, colonists found ways to celebrate life. The sound of a fiddle on a snowy night, the glow of lanterns at a barn dance, these were small rebellions against despair, proof that the human spirit could still find warmth. Before modern science, medicine in the colonies was a mix of faith, folk knowledge, and courage. A toothache might be cured by chewing herbs. Fevers treated with leeches or cold water. Midwives handled childbirth, using remedies passed down from mother to daughter. Superstitions ran deep, a horseshoe above the door to ward off evil, herbs hung from rafters to bring good fortune. Illness was often seen as a test of faith, and healing as a miracle of God. Life expectancy was short. Death was familiar, and yet, colonists faced it with remarkable dignity. They lived not in fear of death, but in gratitude for each new morning. No colonial family survived alone. Neighbors were lifelines. When a barn burned, everyone helped rebuild. When someone fell ill, food appeared at their door. The community was both safety net and extended family. Churches doubled as meeting halls, schools, and sometimes forts. Roads were few, but friendship traveled easily. People bartered goods and labor, a bushel of corn for a pair of shoes, a day's work for a repaired plow. This constant exchange built trust, the invisible currency of early America. It was this spirit of cooperation, this balance between independence and interdependence, that gave birth to the American character. A belief that while every person should stand on their own, no one should stand alone. By the mid-1700s, the colonies were thriving. Towns were growing, ships were sailing farther, and whispers of American identity were beginning to stir. But beneath all the trade, politics, and exploration, the true foundation of America lay in something far humbler, the family hearth. It was at that dinner table, under that thatched roof, that the ideals of faith, work, and liberty were first lived out day by day. The colonies didn't just produce goods, they produced people with a mindset. People who believed that their labor mattered, that their word was sacred, that freedom began in the home. The colonial family didn't know it, but they were crafting something larger than themselves, a moral framework that would one day support a revolution. As the 18th century moved toward its close, a new generation came of age, young men and women who had never seen England, who spoke of our country when they meant America. They had grown up on farms, in workshops, and by hearths just like those we visited in this story. They knew the value of sweat, of fairness, of self-reliance. They were taught to honor God, respect their parents, and question no king but their conscience. When revolution came, it was these children of farmers, blacksmiths, and weavers who picked up muskets and marched. The same hands that had planted corn and forged tools now built a new nation. The spirit that had kept a colonial family alive, hard work, faith, unity, and courage, became the spirit of America itself. The camera pans across a quiet colonial home. A mother kneels by the fire, stirring a pot of stew. A father mends a harness by lamplight. Children sleep above, wrapped in quilts their mother spun by hand. Outside, the wind whispers through the trees. In that stillness, you can almost hear the heartbeat of a nation not yet born, steady, strong, enduring. From these small wooden homes, from these fields and forges, came the idea that ordinary people, through work and will, could build something extraordinary. And so, the story of colonial life, the story of farms, crafts, and family, is not just a tale of the past. It's the story of how America began, not with kings and conquerors, but with families gathered by the fire, dreaming of a better tomorrow. Like this video, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.